Yesterday, in the Democratic primary for New York City mayor, a socialist Marxist nutcase named Zohran Mamdani won the election. He won the Democratic primary. He beat Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo is from the New York ruling family of Democrats, the Cuomos. And yet Zohran Mamdani won by a lot. It wasn't even close. Why? Why did this happen? Why? That's what we're going to examine right now, because there is one reason, and I'm going to walk you through some numbers so you can see exactly what led to this victory and why we should fear for the general election in New York City, because we might just see a repeat of this once you understand why Zohran Mamdani won. And it's not because he's charismatic. It's not because he gets the problems of New Yorkers. It's not because he ran some phenomenal campaign. It's none of that. It's not because he's good at social media. It's none of that. It's because of the demographic of voter who voted for him. So walk through a couple of numbers with me, and you'll see. I'll lead you to the conclusion of why Zohran Mamdani won out of nowhere this Democratic primary. So, of registered voters in New York City, 65% of them are Democrat. Only 11% of registered voters in New York City are Republican. 21.1% are independent. So, a tiny fraction who are Republican. A majority who are Democrat, but a hefty number who are independent. Put a pin in that. We're going to go through just a couple of numbers. The average age of a registered voter in New York City is 49 years old. Now, this is important because those of us who are on the younger side of the millennial generation, I am 35, I will be 36 next month, think of ourselves as young, but the upper edge of the millennial generation is getting towards middle age now. 49 is actually one of the old millennials. They're still in what I would call at least how we perceive them to be, the young voters. It's Gen Z and millennials that are still of the four generations that are voting. Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, 49 and down, from 18 to 49, are still those Gen Z and those millennial voters. Again, this is really important, and you'll see why as we get to this next statistic. So in New York City, there are 5.1 million registered voters in total. 5.1 million. Got to remember that number for a second. Between 750 and 850,000 of those 5 million are Gen Z. They're between the ages of 18 and 29 years old. Additionally, between 1.6 and 1.8 of that 5.1 million registered New York City voters are between the ages of 30 and 49. So I'll just do the math for you. You don't have to get out your scribble sheet and do the math to follow along. That means that 2.5 million, approximately, of New York City's registered voters, that is half of registered voters in New York City, are what I call indoctrinated kids. Now, what do I mean when I call them indoctrinated kids? Obviously, a 49-year-old is not a kid. So what do I mean when I use this phrase, indoctrinated kids? Well, if you look at the breakdown of who voted for Zohran Mamdani versus who voted for Andrew Cuomo, you will find that it was white, college-educated liberals who voted for Zohran Mamdani versus the working class who voted for Andrew Cuomo. Again, this is key, because what has been one of the defining experiences of, put aside Gen Z for a second, of the millennial generation. I'll give you an example of what I mean here. I'll make my point by illustrating. Back when I hosted a show on One America News Network, I hosted a top-rated nightly primetime TV show. I had a segment on my show once a week, every Friday at the end of the show, called Campus Madness. And what we did on this segment called Campus Madness is we took reports from college campuses all over the country of conservative students who were facing discrimination because of liberal professors or liberal college groups or liberal student body votes or whatever it might be. These conservatives were facing discrimination for their viewpoints. Their free speech was being restricted. They were getting bullied. And so we covered it. We exposed this reality that the millennial generation was experiencing, that colleges are liberal. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, well, yeah, Liz, duh, that's obvious. Yes, it is obvious. And it became more obvious thanks to the internet and independent journalists starting to report this, and the courage of these conservative kids on campus exposing this. It wasn't always as common of knowledge as it is right now. But it wasn't just conservative students that were facing discrimination on college campuses. The implications of what was happening when our universities were taken over by leftists is that, yes, conservatives were very genuinely facing discrimination, and that's awful. But all the students that weren't conservative, even if they didn't step onto that college campus as a diehard leftist, they turned into one by the time they left. Because say they came from a family who didn't talk about politics that much. They weren't very principled in their political viewpoints yet. And they get to the college campus and they start facing what at the time, 10 years ago, was the beginnings of wokeism. This very anti-American, revisionist history worldview that they were indoctrinated into. And by the time they left those college campuses, there was this old trope that boomers used to say that, oh, wait until these millennials get to the real world and see how it works. Wait until they get outside the bubble of their college campuses. And that's actually not what happened. What happened is they exported the radical leftist ideology in which they were indoctrinated into the real world. They brought it with them. And so when I say the indoctrinated kids, I'm talking about the millennial generation. And I know technically, by the way, I'm reading the live chat. Technically, ages 45 to 49 are Gen X. And I know Gen X is extremely protective of their identity. So let the record show 45 to 49 is Gen X, but you count for the purposes of the point that I'm making here, because you also experienced on college campuses exactly what I'm laying out. You experienced, if you were conservative, discrimination. If you were politically neutral, kind of bleeding heart, leftist, liberal stereotype of a college student, you became much more leftist on college. And you didn't just leave that at the door when you left campus and joined the real world. You brought that with you. That's part of why we saw all this wokeness in corporations. It wasn't just the ESG metrics that came from BlackRock that were filtering from the top down. There was also a bottom-up effect with all of these young people that were being hired to work at these corporations that brought their wokeness with them. HR departments exploded because of all this victimhood complex that came with the millennial generation specifically. Now, when we're talking about Gen Z, the problem has only been exacerbated. It is exponentially worse. Now on college campuses, it's not just discrimination against conservatives. It's not just, oh, you're going to be a liberal by the time you leave. It is outright hatred of America. It's embracing socialism and Marxism and communism, rejecting God, rejecting family, rejecting natural law. Children who are sent to college now have a high likelihood of coming out of it revolutionary. And so when I use this phrase, indoctrinated kids, when I say that half of registered voters in New York City, 2.5 million of the 5.1 total registered voters in New York City are between the ages of 18 and 49, the indoctrinated kids, what I mean is that all of that indoctrination was successful. When these people cast their votes, now that they are adults living in the real world, they're not looking at their paycheck and seeing taxes and coming to their senses. They are voting for what they were taught is right and moral in college. They're voting for the socialist Marxist nutcase because he is a socialist Marxist nutcase. To call this a problem does not adequately describe the enormity of the flashing red warning light that we should be seeing when we're looking at what's happening in New York City. The fact that Zohran Mamdani, this Muslim immigrant who's been an American citizen for 7 years, who is an outright Marxist, the fact that he won the Democratic primary is a result of universities indoctrinating youth who voted for him. It's also the result of unrestricted immigration. And I know some people will say, Liz, he wasn't an illegal alien. Well, perhaps not, but the left's open borders philosophy is not just permissiveness towards crimes being committed as aliens breach our southern border. It is also an attitude, and this was quite literally in the Biden administration's Department of Homeland Security documents behind the scene, was to view all immigration policies and to form them to be as permissive as possible, to bring in as many people as possible. And Zohran Mamdani is a perfect example of that. So the question, of course, it's kind of startling when you realize that this is going to be the new playbook. This is what we're facing in not just in New York City. This is going to be the reality when Gen Z and the millennial generation are the largest voting demographic, when boomers begin to die off. Sorry to be morbid here, but when they no longer are casting their votes, we're going to see these indoctrinated kids, because they were indoctrinated as kids. That's what I mean. They're going to be voting for evil because they were taught that evil is right. So we need to prevent this. We need to stop this from happening. So at least the next generation is not being indoctrinated into voting for Marxist nutcases like Zohran. So how do we do this? Well, first of all, we have to look at universities, and we can't just expose the corruption verbally and on the news. We can't just highlight instances where conservatives are being facing discrimination, or where Marxist policies are being imposed on people. We should do both of those things, but we also have to cut this off at the root. And what I mean by that is, even universities that claim that they're private universities, they still get government money. Even private universities get government money through research grants and through federally subsidized student loans. And that doesn't even take into account the public universities that are getting a lot more state and federal dollars than just student loans and research grants. We have to stop that. And this is something the Trump administration can do. This is something that can be done at the Department of Education, and something that can be done by governors in red states and departments of education in red states if there is indoctrination in socialism, Marxism, communism, anti-Americanism, racism. They lose their federal funding. Everything. They lose their access to federally subsidized student loans. They lose their research grants. You know, these college professors wouldn't have jobs if it weren't for the fact that they get research grants from the federal government. It's not like universities are profitable just because of tuition dollars. The teaching is something a lot of these professors just kind of do on the side. What they actually want to do is write papers about why you're an evil bigot or something. Cut the funding. Cut the funding and do it now. Otherwise, what's happening in New York City is going to happen all across the country. It's not just about discrimination against conservative students. What's happening on our college campuses is changing our nation before our very eyes into a Marxist hellhole. And by the way, these young people, these Gen Zers and these millennials, we have enjoyed incredible prosperity in our country. America is so freaking cool. We have a booming economy. We have never lacked for anything that we wanted, or at least the opportunity to try to achieve anything that we want. And because of that, because we have never waited in a Soviet-style bread line, because we have never been in a concentration camp, sometimes that's hard for us to imagine what that's like. It's hard to imagine what even a food shortage might be like, which is somewhat of an ironic and intentional example that I'm giving, because Zohran Mamdani, we talked about this on the show yesterday, he promises to have government-run, government-owned grocery stores in New York City to make food more affordable. And he said that they're not going to be operating on a profit motive. And he promises that New Yorkers are going to get to pocket the savings. They're going to save money because food's not going to cost as much. That's his promise. And clearly voters are falling for this. Oh, yeah.
The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm Zohran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent, and will pass on those savings to you.
So what's going to happen, of course, is that would put out of business all grocery store competitors. So all privately owned grocery stores would not be able to compete with these government-operated food banks. And the result of that would be a food shortage. New Yorkers wouldn't have enough food to go around. They wouldn't have access to the food they needed because this socialist has not read his history books and doesn't understand what happens when government seizes the production and distribution of food. The millennial generation and Gen Z never experienced food shortages. So when I say that, it's like an intangible threat. It's an intangible warning. They don't know what it's like. And so it's hard to take that as seriously as being annoyed about how much they just paid for eggs and milk. They desire this utopia that just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. For example, a perfect example of this, and this is, by the way, where Democrats often succeed in the public or the public's perception of their policies. Bring this post up on the screen, Spencer, if you would, of that viral post about the barbecue. You have it on screen right now. Okay, so look at this. This went completely viral on X a couple weeks ago. It's a picture of a grocery store aisle, shelves filled with barbecue sauces. And the caption on this photo is, "Capitalism can't give you a working healthcare system, but it can give you 175 different kinds of barbecue sauce." 5.8 million people viewed this point because it is kind of interesting. Like, look at all that barbecue sauce. Like, how do you even choose which one you want? That is a ridiculous number of options. And a lot of people didn't click into the post to read the responses. But if you do click into the post to read the responses, look at that one. It says capitalism and free markets would fix the U.S. healthcare system, which suffers a lack of capitalism and free markets. Oh, yes, that's right. It's not that capitalism broke our healthcare system. It's that it's overregulated by politicians. And this is the perpetual conundrum of conservatives and Republicans. When there is some kind of pithy marketing campaign like that barbecue post that's like an anti-capitalist, catchy slogan, people see that and they're like, oh, wow, look at that illustrated. Why can't we get better healthcare if we can get all these barbecue bottles? And then Republicans come with our nerdy white papers and we're like, actually, the overregulation in the healthcare industry is what causes the problem. And listen, we're actually right. Practically and morally, our nerdy white papers are correct. But it's just not quite as catchy as the picture of the barbecue. That is Zohran Mamdani in a nutshell. And because these young generations of voters, millennials and Gen Z, have enjoyed tremendous prosperity, and we've never faced the adversity of food shortages, for example, we believe in utopia that doesn't exist. And then you compound that with the indoctrination on college campuses that turns normal people not just into bleeding heart leftists, but into committed socialists and Marxists, even communist revolutionaries. And this is what you get. Half of registered voters in the city of New York are in that indoctrinated kids generation, and 1 million registered voters in that age demographic. So that means 20% of total registered voters in New York City are college educated. But during the indoctrination years. Do you think that didn't make a difference? I mean, we talk about deciding factors in elections. Sometimes it's a demographic that's 1 or 2 or 5 or 6 or 10. 20% are college educated and Gen Z and millennial. That is why Zohran Mamdani won the Democrat primary for mayor of New York City. And it's why we should fear what happens in the general election, despite the fact, this is what I would do, by the way, if I were running in the general election to defeat Zohran Mamdani. What I would do if I were running against him is I would remind Democrat voters, because in a sense, even if you're the Republican candidate, or even if you're Eric Adams running as an independent, Republican votes are a small minority of votes in New York City. What, 11%? Isn't that the number we said before? So you're going to have to make the case to Democrats why they shouldn't vote for the Marxist Zohran. So what's the case that you make to Democrats? Well, you focus on what we've been calling the 80-20 issues that 80% of Americans, regardless of political affiliation, we all agree about them. And fortunately, or unfortunately for New York City, depending on the ultimate outcome of this election, Zohran Mamdani is on the wrong side of all 4 critical 80-20 issues in our country right now. Crime, Zohran Mamdani is a defund the police champion. He calls the police white supremacist and oppressive and anti-queer a billion times. Look at this series of screenshots of him supporting defunding the police. New York City, by the way, tried defunding the police. And what happened? You were hurt. You became less safe. Your stuff was stolen. Your families were assaulted. And so they refunded the police, even though it's a liberal city, because defunding the police is dangerous. Zohran Mamdani is on the wrong side of that 80-20 issue. What about the border crisis? The majority of Americans, the vast majority, are against open borders. They're against the invasion of illegal aliens. Not Zohran Mamdani. He is for them. He is against the ICE raids. He's, in fact, said he wanted to stand up to President Trump and work to stop federal immigration raids in the city. This is what he said.
A city where they can do more than just struggle. One where those who toil in the night can enjoy the fruits of their labor in the day. Where hard work is repaid with a stable life. Where 8 hours on the factory floor or behind the wheel of a cab is enough to pay the mortgage. It is enough to keep the lights on. It is enough to send your kid to school. Where rent-stabilized apartments are actually stabilized. Where buses are fast and free. Where childcare doesn't cost more than CUNY. And where public safety keeps us truly safe. And it's where the mayor will use their power to reject Donald Trump's fascism. To stop mass ICE agents from deporting our neighbors. And to govern our city as a model for the Democratic Party.
And by the way, Zohran Mamdani's opposition to ICE raids in New York City, calling these illegal aliens your neighbors. Are you calling the sex offender your neighbor? Are you calling the murderer your neighbor? Are you calling the international gangbanger your neighbor? This came on the heels of sitting New York City Mayor Eric Adams reversing his immigration policy when he realized it was unsustainable to house illegal aliens in luxury hotels. The people of New York City rejected the open borders, sanctuary city garbage that was being imposed on them, and Zohran Mamdani wants to bring that back. And then, of course, he holds a viewpoint that all Marxist revolutionaries hold. He is anti-white. This is not just a feature of his philosophy. This is an underpinning of his philosophy. This is critical race theory, again, an 80-20 issue. People across the country recognize that it is evil to look at someone and say, you're inherently racist because of the color of your skin. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. The vast, vast, vast majority of people reject that evil. But Zohran Mamdani embraces it and preaches it. Zohran Mamdani also wants to use $65 million of taxpayer money to trans kids. You heard that correctly. To trans kids. He calls it, of course, gender-affirming care, and minors are included in what he wants to do, taking your taxpayer money, using it to pay doctors to trans kids. An 80-20 issue. I think that's not even 80-20. That's like 90-10. That's like 98-2, because it's so abjectly evil. Abjectly evil. This is what I would do if I were running against Zohran Mamdani and I wanted to defeat him, and I had to defeat him among Democrats. Focus on the 80-20 issues, because Zohran Mamdani is a radical. He's a socialist. He's a Marxist. He's a communist. The reason he won this primary is because of the indoctrinated kids. And by the way, Mamdani is an indoctrinated kid himself. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a professor at Columbia University. And Zohran Mamdani went himself to a ritzy, snooty, elitist liberal arts college in Maine. He is the embodiment of the indoctrinated kids. Again, we can stop this right now. Defund these universities, their research grants. Defund these universities, these federally subsidized student loans. Tell them if they don't stop turning out communists, they're done. President Trump can do this. The Department of Education can do this. Governors in red states can do this. Departments of Education in red states can do this. And we ought to. Otherwise, what's happening in New York City is going to happen next in your community.